Hello! Look, it's a door! Right, hello. You may have read a story recently about Daniel Tosh. He got into a bit of trouble when he received a visit from the comedy inspector in the form of a lovely young lady who went to one of his comedy shows, stood up in the middle of the audience and yelled, "Actually, rape is never funny." She went on to start a bit of a flame war across the internet in which several people, believe it or not, agreed with her. She's right, rape is never funny. Never. It's the certainty that bugs me, scares me, if I'm honest. Never funny. Never is superlative, never is absolute. And funny is entirely subjective. It's the words don't partner up at all. It's not just an oxymoron, it's a paradox. It's a paradoxymoron. You really are saying your sometimes doesn't disprove my never. Your scepticism is invalid because of my certainty. Your opinion doesn't count because mine does. You may think you can imagine an imaginary situation in which an imaginary rape could be considered funny, but you can't. No one ever finds rape funny because I don't. What about murder? Is murder never funny? People use murder all the time as a tool for creative license. You probably said words to the effect of, "I'm going to kill you in a minute," many, many times in your life, but no one has ever batted an eyelid because they know you're not serious. Yet, if you so much as say the word rape, someone somewhere will accuse you of advocating rape culture. Look, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say murder is worse than rape. Because it is. But for some reason, it's less taboo. Probably because murder victims are a lot more laid back than rape victims. You may have been affected by murder. You may know someone who's been murdered, so you get to say, please don't mock me specifically for having parents who were murdered or something. But you wouldn't dream of forbidding everyone from ever telling a joke that featured the concept of murder, because that would be unbelievably arrogant of you. It's no less arrogant in the case of rape, just because the victims are still alive. In fact, if anything, it's slightly more arrogant, because you're like a wounded soldier screaming from an injury lying next to a silent casualty. You don't get better medical attention just because you're noisy. On the contrary, it only shows you're still functioning enough to be noisy. Look, we've all had to put up with nasty shit at some point in our lives. It doesn't give us more rights. You don't get to censor people just because your nasty shit involved sexual organs. There are worse things than rape out there. For instance, people get stabbed. Or is having a knife plunged between your ribs not as bad as having a penis plunged into a hole that's already there? See, now you're reaching for the dislike button, thinking, oh, he's saying rape's not bad, he's saying we should all rape. No, cool your jets. No one says that. No one ever says that and means it. What I'm saying is rape is very, 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 very bad, but it's not quite the worst thing that can happen to a person, even if it is the worst thing that's happened to you. You don't often hear victims of violence saying violence is never funny. You don't often hear victims of bereavement saying death is never funny, because they've got their heads screwed on. And because they're not taking advantage of a polite society riddled with hypocritical misandry. Bet you've never heard of the word misandry, but you know all about misogyny. Funny that. You may wonder why I'm attacking rape victims. I'm not. I'm attacking censorship junkies of all flavours. So very often these people aren't victims themselves. People who genuinely are traumatised by an event don't often tend to talk that much about that event because they're traumatised by it. Censorship junkies more often than not are talking about issues they don't understand on behalf of people they've never met. And some of them do have admirable motives. A lot of them don't. A lot of them are just prigs who want attention and they've never figured out how to get positive attention. But some of them do have their hearts in the right place. But none of them have their brains in the right place, because violence, rape and murder are problems because they are infringements of freedom. And you can't fix or prevent that by censoring speech, because that's another infringement of freedom. And the only freedoms we are free to infringe on are the freedoms to infringe on freedom. And rape jokes are not infringements of freedom. You can't use words to stop someone from doing something. You can reason with them, you can convince them to stop themselves, but you can't use force by words alone. That's why words are so awesome and why they can never be censored. Because they are, essentially, among other things, weapons that do no harm. No, you have not been harmed by words. You have been offended by words. You've been depressed by things that words describe. You've been angered or scared by a person's choice of words. But these are all reactions that go on in the mind. Harm is something that happens outside the mind in the physical world. It's an important difference. Words are the kinds of weapons we should be using, not the kinds of weapons we should be censoring. Especially not the words of comedians, who by definition are not to be taken literally. Comedians are there to use words in an obtuse or inflammatory way. You can't go to a comedy club and yell, "How dare you use words in an obtuse and inflammatory way?" It's their job. It's why you're there. But it's actually not just comedians. You can't censor anyone. Even if it's a rally of religious extremists saying we'll kill all the infidels, or neo-Nazis saying we'll kill all the darkies. You can't censor them either. You have to actually argue with them. Which isn't difficult in the case of neo-Nazis and religious extremists, because they're all fuck-headed morons. If you hear words with which you disagree, you fight them with other words. You do not fight them by taking away their ability to use words, because then we are all fucked. If you take freedom of speech away from one group, then you've created a mechanism for taking freedom of speech away from groups, and it will not stop there. It will take freedom of speech from every group. We must all have the inalienable right to express ideas, no matter who we are, no matter what we're saying. Daniel Tosh is free to tell rape jokes. Humorless prude in the audience is free to yell rape is never funny, and the rest of the audience is free to yell, well, get out of the comedy club. Try going to a brewery and yelling beer is never tasty. Which you're also free to do. Freedom of expression is non-negotiable because it makes the world a better place. Take racism, right? As little as 2 generations ago, people like your grandparents told racist jokes and laughed because they thought they were true. They genuinely believed other races were dangerous and wrong. Nowadays, people tell racist jokes and laugh because they know them to be false. Because you're not allowed to say that. Because you know racism to be dangerous and wrong. The butt of the joke is no longer the race, it is the racism. That's what comedy does. It finds this magical way to evolve internally within a maintained shell, to reach the same punchline through different means, be it the righteous or the naughty. And race jokes, as a result, have become so declawed that they're now shared across races in a mature and rational spirit. That is freedom of expression at work. If censorship junkies had their way, racist jokes would simply be banned. And when you ban an essentially victimless crime, you only push it underground and supersize it. When you take away the weapons that do no harm, people might just start reaching for weapons that do harm. Nowadays, people tell jokes about rape for the same reason. It's a more viscerally horrific subject matter than racism, so its parodies are often misunderstood, but the pure motive is the same, to ridicule the act of rape. Not the rape victim, the rape. If no one ever talked about rape, if no one ever acknowledged that it was a thing, nothing would ever get done about it. Like in a few Bronze Age theocracies I could name. If the only words spoken about rape are of fearful reverence, like in the news, then you grant nothing but fearful reverence to the act. It was like whenever a young American nutjob goes and just shoots a bunch of people, the whole news media has to talk about it all day, as solemnly, as somberly as possible. And the other potential crazies are sitting at home watching it going, oh wow, that one guy brought the whole world to an emotional standstill. I bet I could do that. And he's right. He could. How do you argue with that? I'll tell you exactly how you argue with that. You say, no, you will not bring the world to an emotional standstill because this world contains comedians. And when comedians get hold of you, they will not give you fearful reverence. They will grant you nothing but obnoxious schoolyard ridicule. And that, aside from the necessary criminal justice, is all a murderer deserves. And it's all a rapist deserves. Evil people don't mind being called evil. They hate being called ridiculous. And that's what comedians are doing. They're taking and using the harmless weapons of words and humour and irony and good spirit, and using them to dismantle and neutralise the harmful weapons of prejudice and violence and rape. And if you are trying to censor comedians, then you have firmly placed yourself in the camp of violence and prejudice. You are complicit in your tacit support of rape and its status as a sacred secret doctrine of the underworld, and you should be fucking ashamed of yourselves. Goodbye and fuck off.